whether it's a friendship, romantic partnership, if you allow others to batter your relationship around, generally that relationship begins to break down. The same if you have a lackadaisical who cares attitude in that connection, or you're frozen and you don't move forward and you don't know how to engage. Eventually it begins to wear on a relationship and the relationship breaks down. Hi, and welcome to the Heart Leader Podcast, where our heart and our mind align. I'm your host, Amber, and I am here with Austin as we dive into another fun-filled discussion around silencing that inner critic. We've been doing that in our time together here on the Heart Leader Podcast as we discuss a book that we're writing by the same name, Silence Your Inner Critic. It is a guide to developing a positive self-relationship. And that will be our focus actually for today. We want to discover why we call it a guide to building a positive self-relationship and how the inner critic can really get in there and distort the view that we have of ourselves and the relationship that we have with others. And then as we make this transition between the origin story, because we really kind of see this inner critic as being a supervillain that has infiltrated our lair in many ways, that inner world that we've built, and it takes over and it distorts our view of ourselves. And in order to have our hero journey and regain our superhero, our inner champion, we have to have the tools to really bring that inner critic back into a place of being silenced. We may never be able to completely destroy that inner critic because in any superhero saga, we don't really destroy the supervillain. There's always a little something, but we have the tools to rise up and consistently have our own inner champion place that supervillain back into their place. And so that's what we're going to discuss as we move from having the origin story told of where that supervillain came from to the effects that it has on our life, our self-relationship and the relationship with others, our discussion today. And then next week, we move into the tools that you acquire in order to be that inner champion and take down the villainous inner critic. So in our superhero saga, Austin,
yes,
with the inner critic, when we're talking about that self-relationship and the impact that our inner critic has when it gets in there and it's like that constant barrage and distorts our perception of self and what we're capable of, what would you offer are personal experiences that you've had or that you've even seen with clients or friends where it starts to create distance of the knowing of self? Even as we talked about origin stories of the inner critic, it really gets in there and it starts to claim its rights over our life and take us down to our knees. So how do we feed the inner champion and bring it back up to where it's like, this is my life. And you don't get to tell me how I'm going to live it.
Well, I can definitely speak from personal experience. I touched on it throughout this whole kind of series on this podcast of kind of describing my story a little bit. And it kind of really, my inner critic really, as you say, reared its head kind of after my injury for most of my early 20s. Is it really, as the thing that I thought I was going to be was taken away from me in that perception, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't know who I was what I was going to do in life. Everything that I'd spent my entire life building up to was now off the table. My inner critic really sprung up and shaped the next few years, like my, let's call it age 20 through 25, was really rough for sure. I didn't realize that I could be that disconnected from who I am because I just let the inner critic actually become who I am. I lost sight of everything that I was and attempted to embody what I thought everyone and everything around me wanted me to be. And it was from a good place, but it also, I didn't recognize the detriment that I was doing to myself. And from a non-egoic place, the detriment that I was doing to others too, right? And I would say this for anyone else, right? I don't want to see what you want me to see about you. I want to see who you are. And so when I say that, I'm not coming from an egoic place. Like, I just desire people to see me for who I am and like my true authentic self. And so, yeah, it was quite a journey. And thanks to you, I found my way back.
Yeah. And that's a huge part of it is, and we'll talk about this when we talk about creating personal boundaries and guiding principles, but we can think about it as we have our own circle really around us, our own energetic personal space that really defines, it's our center, right? This is who we are and what we know ourselves to be. And we can call it our inner layer or our inner outer layer, right? It's like, this is me. And when the inner critic starts to have all of the direction over what that is, it determines who's going to come in and out, right? It's like, yeah, people can step all over you because what does it matter? You're worthless anyway, right? And so suddenly that inner sanctum no longer exists because everyone's just traipsing in and out whenever. So your sense of self-worth is gone and you just become tossed about by everything outside of you because you have no self-worth. Or how you're going to engage in the world from within that personal space, within that inner sanctum. Like, you lose sight of how you desire to engage in the world. And so then you're either frozen and you don't engage at all, or you have a, who cares? It doesn't matter anyway, kind of attitude toward it. And you end up making choices that may not be in your best interest either way. And that creates, think about any relationship outside of yourself. If you walk into it in that way, it's like, oh, anybody can do anything they want to our relationship. Who cares? Well, who's going to stay engaged in a relationship like that for very long, right? Whether it's a friendship or a romantic partnership. If you allow others to batter your relationship around, generally that relationship begins to break down. The same if you have a lackadaisical who cares attitude in that connection, or you're frozen and you don't move forward and you don't know how to engage. Eventually it begins to wear on a relationship and the relationship breaks down. Well, the same is true for the relationship that you have within yourself. That relationship is the most important, I would offer, because wherever you go, there you are. Like, you can get distance and space from another individual, collect yourself, and come back. it takes time and focus and defined mindful interaction within ourselves to have that same type of clarity. And that's why what we're creating with what we're doing in this podcast and what we're doing with this book and through the entire Sweave era focus is so important, because it gives resources to create that internal distance so that you can say, okay, I got this, and come back and have that defined strength for your inner champion to rise up and say, I recognize you now, you villainous inner critic. Nope, this is not happening anymore.
Yeah. So well said. As someone who lived that and felt completely disconnected from who I am, like almost like I was like reaching out and like I just like, waiting for a lifeboat or, a life raft for someone to like send that to me. And I was just like grasping and felt like I was kind of drowning, and realizing that I am the lifeboat. Like it wasn't until I had that recognition that, I don't know how my life would have turned out. Very, very different, because maybe people listening or watching right now can relate to that feeling. I'm sorry if you do, because it's not fun when you feel that disconnected from who you are, feel that lost, and wondering how is it that like everyone around you knows who they are and why don't you? And even that in and of itself is the inner critic providing an illusion. But I was so shocked at how much that was like embodied in every aspect of who I am. And then I let that take everything completely over. And then I was attempting to pull from everyone around me, which I thought was good. Like, oh, let me, like, they know what's the best part of them. Like, let me pull that and that and that. Kind of like I would attempt to with golf. Like if I saw a good golf swing, like, oh, this guy, hits well with, and let me add that in. And, oh, this guy putts really well, or this guy chipped, so I was attempting to add in. And so in different areas of my life, it made sense. And so I wanted to like make that happen for me, but I didn't realize that I'm already whole, and that was the big misunderstanding. And that's what the inner critic just feeds on, is our inability to see that we're already whole, and that we're not here. Like we always hear that like this planet being on Earth is like a school, right? But that is the assumption that you don't already know things. We all have that inner knowing. That's our soul. That's our connection to ourself. That's our authentic being of who we are. And until we shift that perspective and recognize that it's not about the knowing, it's about the experiencing, and using the knowing to generate the experiences that you desire, then that changes the whole game.
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, I would offer it's not even about knowing everything. And that's part of what that inner critic loves to feed on, right?
Right.
Well, if I don't already know it, then I'm going to look silly going after it. Well, what a quick way to grab someone by the scruff of the neck and hold them back. Like, no, when we're kids, we know nothing about the things that are going on around us most of the time. But that's when we're our most self-confident. And it's like, I don't care that I don't know it. I'm going to go do it anyway.
Yeah.
And so if we could just have an ounce of that self-confidence and self-worth back, knowing that if I don't need the knowledge of everything, I just need the willingness to have the experience, as you just said, which will then give me the knowledge to do it again. And that's where the distorted view of ourselves begins to come in, and our self-relationship begins to break down so very much. Because even and I'm going to talk about our connection and our relationship a little bit here.
Absolutely.
Right? It is a strong connection and a strong relationship. But it's not as though there haven't been moments where we've had to say to one another, it's okay to not be perfect and to make mistakes with one another.
Yeah.
And you've worried over and over that I'm going to leave the moment that you make a mistake. And so you get so concerned. And I've had to ask you, are you mad at me? And you'll say, no, I'm not mad at you. I'm frustrated with myself because now you're going to want to leave me. Mm. And we've had to have really deep discussions around making a mistake doesn't mean that I leave. Yeah. Making a mistake means that we learn about our relationship. And so immediately, it's almost like the inner critic went from inside to sitting right in between us. Like, ha, 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 look at the two of you. Yeah. Now, how do we create some dynamic where I can feed off of both of you? Now I'm no longer just inside one of your heads. I'm inside both of your heads. Yeah. And that's how it starts to break down not only that self-relationship, but that relationship in others that we share with one another. Yeah. And we have this dynamic that fortunately for us, we can talk it through. And we can be very open and clear in our dialogue. Or if we find we're not, then we honor our own personal boundaries and we take a little bit of space and we come back together, recognizing where that inner critic has gotten a hold of us. But as a collective, as a whole, as humanity, we haven't all gained these skills yet. And it can really begin to fuel and amplify different disagreements. And so the inner critic is like, ha, 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 the villain has moved from an inner sanctum to taking over. How do we take over the world, right? This is how. Yeah. And so the best defense we have against this villain is to safeguard our own inner sanctum.
I like that. Yeah. I mean, I just kept getting the visual as you were saying that, as like inner critic, as it kind of works within us, but then kind of attaches to others and then fuels their inner critic. And then it's almost like a virus in like how we talk to ourselves, our relationship with ourselves, how conscious and aware we are is almost like our immune system. And so it's a way, like, we're never going to get rid of viruses, right? And it's just like, we're never going to get rid of an inner critic. But we can have a healthy immune system, meaning like a healthy relationship with ourselves that we can keep balance and we can keep ahead. And we can, people who have healthy immune systems that might be, maybe sick for a day or something like that. And it's pretty rare and it happens and, that's okay. But those who don't have healthy immune systems, it could be really devastating, unfortunately. And so that's kind of a way for us to maybe be able to create a different perspective around our relationship with our inner critic, recognizing that we, as you said beautifully, like if we see it outside of ourselves, then it's a way to create that separation, knowing that it's not us, and everything that it says is not us. It's a conglomeration of all that's been around us, telling us in many ways what and who, what not to be, who not to be, and so we can adjust that. And we can be that love, that light, that authentic version of who we are and lift up from that and create a different choice and make a separation. So that's like, hey, when the inner critic is there and it does provide some value of keeping us maybe grounded, for example, so we're not too far one way.
Yeah, exactly.
Or maybe it's like one of those things that's like, hey, sometimes I allow my inner critic to help me because it really moves me forward. Okay, great. But that's not the inner critic taking over. That's not the inner critic embodying. That's you creating a conscious relationship with the inner critic for a purpose. And most people just don't have any intention or purpose behind the relationship with their inner critic, let alone the overall relationship with who they are as a person.
Yes. And again, going back, metaphors, lists, movies. These are things that for me just really, really help. And so if for anyone else they are useful, then I offer them. If they are not useful, then hey, you know a quirk about me.
Yeah.
Okay. But if you read comics or watch these superhero movies in any way, and given the blockbusters they turn out to be, I'm guessing a lot of people watch them.
Yeah.
There are times when the supervillain in a movie ends up being someone that a superhero will either team up with because they have a good understanding of a bigger supervillain that is going on and beginning to wreak havoc on the city, or they team up and follow them in order to gain more insight about how to ultimately win that one battle. And so if teaming up or watching and taking information from is a good way to align with your inner critic, then use that. But you're right. You have to understand the difference, the separation within yourself first. And we had talked about in a previous podcast how so many of us have become so numb to that inner critic. Our self relationship has become so suppressed that the inner critic has stepped in and has somehow caused us to believe that that's who we are, that we are that negative voice in our head, that we are that critical voice that plays over and over. And so our first step is that awareness, that realization that that is not who we are. That is a separate, it's still part of who we are in some ways because it's an internal aspect, but it doesn't dominate our persona. When we leave this world, however your faith or your belief system causes you to believe you take that next step, there's a likely probability that that inner critic will not take that next step with you. Therefore, you must ask yourself, is it truly part of the I am, who I am, or is it something that has been with me in this part of my journey, and therefore I can separate it from the who I am?
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, there might be a fundamental misunderstanding with the concept of I think, therefore I am, and that allowing the thinking that we have, which isn't always ours, to determine who we are in terms of the I am. And I love that what you just said. I mean, yeah, shifting into no, I am, therefore I am. I know it sounds simple and it sounds almost silly, but sometimes we have to have that kind of awareness of recognizing like we are never not ourselves. We're just experiencing different versions of who we are. And I know that, like when I was so disconnected from who I was, watching everyone around me, watching TV or watching movies and seeing, oh, I want to be like that person, or I want to be like this, or I want to live like that. Never once did I say, I want to create a life for me. Or, what does even, it looks great, but is that actually what I desire? Is that who I really want to be? Is that even who I'm meant to be? These are strong questions that I never even thought to comprehend. And the more I just went, nosedive in, without asking any questions, the further and more separated I got from myself. To the point where I almost didn't even recognize who I was. I was so unhappy at everything I could want on paper, the life that most people would be very, very happy to live. But I was like, why am I so unhappy? Okay. And I was very lucky. I had people, parents who love me, friends who love me, businesses that were great. I had everything you could quote unquote want, but like, why was I so unhappy? And the very essence of who I am is because I had no connection to the very essence of who I am. And I know we've talked about that if we're going towards that further step of like what happens after we die. We're talking about faith or religion and all that. Many people would call that you know, hell, or what it feels like to be in that like separation. It's like because we're further away from ourselves and therefore further away from the divine, then that's what it feels like to be living in hell. And the closer you are, the reason why you feel so amazing when you are your authentic self and you're so connected to who you are, and it's just there's nothing that could describe the beauty that it is. It's like being like living in heaven. And I really do feel that as someone who's been so far on one side and come back into my authentic self, like I feel like I get to choose to live in heaven every single day. Now I can make the conscious choice to choose otherwise, but why? Now that I have the understanding and the awareness and the conscious choice behind it, the intention, I want to live in that connectedness and the authentic version of who I am, because it makes me feel closer to God. It makes me feel closer to you. It makes me feel closer to all the people and amazing things in my life. And that's worth choosing in every moment.
And when we talk about what you did to get from that heavier feeling, that more disconnected feeling, back to that lighter feeling or that connected and blissful feeling within yourself and even within your relationships. I do recall there was a point where you were like, just tell me what to do. And that was the reaching out. And I remember saying, I can't tell you what to do, but I can give you tools that will assist you as you do it for yourself. And that is one of the number one pieces of information that I want to communicate to everyone out there. This isn't something that someone else can do for you. The reason we call it an inner sanctum or an inner journey is I can't get into your body. I can't take on your self relationship or building that positive self relationship. I can arm you with every tool and every resource I have collected along my own journey, which has been a very arduous one, and I have definitely pulled from so many places around the world in order to have an arsenal. And I will hand my arsenal over, but I cannot take the journey for you. I can guide you along the path, and I can answer every question you have along the way until the moment you look at me and say, I've got this. I'm good. I will ask you if I need more support. And that's where you got to. It was, I've got this. I'm ready to guide others. And it becomes that amazing journey where the individual, your self relationship becomes so strong that others are like, what did you do? And then they start asking, and your confidence, your self relationship, and your self esteem is like, I can tell you, I can give you the tools that I've acquired along the way, but I can't do it for you. And it becomes that beautiful flow that strengthens relationships. You no longer feel like you need to dominate or control how someone else's journey is going, because you realize that no one could tell you how to navigate your journey. Therefore, you can't tell someone else how to navigate, and you can't control someone else's. You can suggest, you can provide, you can guide, but you can't dominate or control.
Such a good point. And I feel like the deep beauty of what you're saying is like, I was very nervous when you said, I can open the door, but you have to walk through it. And my first thought, because I was so disconnected, is like, well, then why is she abandoning me, right? Here she gave me all these tools, and now it's like, oh, well, go figure it out yourself. It's like, and that's because I was so disconnected to who I am, and I didn't realize that you were offering me the greatest gift. And that greatest gift is that you were seeing in me what I had yet to see in myself. And that is that I, like each one of us, are a divine creator. And I, just like anyone else, has the ability to choose. In witnessing someone else's pure choice and their free will is like saying, I see you as the divine creator that you are. And honoring that free will, again, is to me one of the most respectful things that we can do. And so I didn't realize how much respect and how much love and how much connection that you were providing me by opening the door for me and saying, I'm right here with you. I can't do it for you, but I'm going to walk along with you as you see yourself. And that gift of being able to see myself for who I am is something I will never be able to thank you enough for.
Wow. Being able to witness you as you are is the greatest gift. And that's the gift that as we start to see this throughout our entire community, it's going to be an overwhelming gift.
Agreed.
Now, I am just super excited to see that.
I agree. And I think that's what connects us so much, because constantly we are both, as our relationship, if I may go into that,
Of course.
is that we both make a concerted effort to see each other for the divine creator beings that we are. We recognize and we witness each other for the actions that we take, big or small. And we lift each other up in that. And that's a beautiful purpose. That's a beautiful intention. And it brings us closer, because the closer we are to our individual selves, then the more we have to offer to us as a collective self. And it's just brought us, as a pair, closer and closer. But that's scalable.
Yeah. Now, I do desire to be very clear when you say divine creator beings. Mm-hmm. We honor every faith and every belief path. So are you saying, when you say divine creator beings, that you're God?
I feel, for me personally, I feel that we all are embodying God. And so that's right. I guess I could adjust that differently so that it's aware for everyone else. And so it's just, when I see someone, I see them as a divine being, and I see myself as that. And so I feel like it's a oneness energy connection through love.
So a reflection of God through each and every being.
Correct. That's a beautiful way to say it. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. For me, it just is very helpful if we are able to share where we, by all means, what we feel and what we believe as well, but in a way that it unifies us instead of creating that separation, because that is the goal. Love is what binds us all. Whether we call that divinity or we call that love, it is that beauty. And again, when we have that self-relationship and we can speak from that place of, this is how I perceive from my inner sanctum to the outer world, then I can honor how you perceive from your inner sanctum to the outer world. Doesn't mean that I'm correct and you're not. How dare your inner sanctum be somewhere else? Yeah. It just means that this is my perception and this is how I honor from my view. And the same is true for, I honor that you see the flow as reflections of God through every person. And if someone else sees it differently, that's a beautiful perspective. And I cannot wait to learn from that perspective, because it gives us all a very different view. And that comes from being self-aware enough to know that that doesn't have to change how my inner world goes. The inner critic doesn't have to pop up and go, they're wrong or I'm wrong.
Yeah.
It is an amazing thing when we can have so many different viewpoints and learn from each other through those viewpoints.
It's well said. Absolutely. And whether I say like the divine creator in me sees divine creator in you, or the love in me sees the love in you, or the soul in me sees the soul in you, or the human I am sees the human you are, like, to me, I feel like they're saying it's all the same thing, but I feel like it's really important to be aware of where everyone is coming from, in the lens and the perspective that is helping them be the greatest version of the grandest vision of who they are. And so I appreciate you clarifying that, and just to, I definitely desire to share, hey, this is just so people can understand where I'm coming from.
Right.
And so I appreciate you bringing that up so that I can kind of effectively communicate that, hey, this is where I think, but this is what I feel. But this is not as Suivera, like, we're open to all faiths, all belief systems, all perspectives. And the more perspectives we can have, the greater vision that we can attain.
Yeah. But it opens the gateway to observe. And I look for these too. It's like, okay, but where does the inner critic get in there to break down those relationships between us, but as people, and within myself? And that's a big gaping area where that inner critic gets right in there and starts to create that separation. Our beliefs is just there are really big hot topic areas, and we're not going to dive into them, but we're going to mention them here.
Yeah.
Religion, politics, our cultures, these are very big areas where we love to create separation among ourselves, instead of embracing what makes us very similar and connects us as humanity. And when we create that gaping opening for the inner critic to spiral in the negatives and pointing out all of the perceived differences and what's wrong and what's wrong and what's wrong, then we're just fueling that fire over and over. But when we redirect that and we have the dialogue, much like we just had, asking for clarification, this is what I received. Is this what you meant or intended? Or can you provide me with a little more context so that I can be aware? Then we remove the opportunity for that inner critic to pounce like a puma, and say, all right, well, he's saying that what I believe is wrong, because that's not what you were saying. And then it keeps me from like spiraling in, oh, am I wrong? Am I wrong? Wait a second, am I? Or is he wrong? Or no, neither is true. It's that we're both just seeing things differently, but kind of saying the same exact thing. And love is what's binding that whole discussion. And we talked about this a little bit in our last episode, how, you get into that whole flow of negative thought and fear, right? I fear that I'm wrong in my belief. Therefore, it's spinning a negative thought. That negative thought is going to spiral that fear even deeper. But if we can get to a neutral point, that point of curiosity, that point of let me seek more information, let me seek similarities, let me seek understanding, then we can get to that point of positive thought and love. Positive thought and love. That's love for self-relationship, love for others, and what they might be navigating, because we're all navigating something. Heaven knows we're all navigating something. And then the love for the journey that I'm having, the love for the journey that others are having, so that when we talk about the inner champion rising and silencing that inner critic, that's how we navigate that.
Yeah.
So thanks for providing a real-time opportunity.
Oh yeah, of course. Absolutely. And I love, we all are navigating something. I think that's such a great perspective. I mean, if there's one thing that you and I feel like that connects everything is love. People, plants, animals, like we all understand love. There's science behind that. There's visually, we can see that, like it permeates everything. But if there's a second language that connects us all, it might be the understanding that we're all navigating something.
Yeah.
So
exactly. We all got our own thing.
Even if you don't believe that love connects everything, I think maybe that might be a closest next step. So I appreciate you brought that forward. And absolutely, I love that you kind of asked, because I think clarity is such a great point. I mean, we take a lot of times we take communication at face value. And if we were just to sit and ask a little bit more for clarity, just like, hey, I love what you're saying. That sounds great. I don't fully understand it. Can you provide it? And like, it sounds like that's the perspective that you may have. Can you rephrase it in a way that might help me? Because I share a different perspective. And so that way it might help bridge more gaps. And I think that's exactly, although I know you and I have a lot of the same perspectives, but where we don't, I feel like that's what we do. And we help each other understand. And more times than not, as you're saying, we're saying the same thing in just a different way. And so by taking the time to ask the question in and of itself is a loving act. Taking the time to seek to understand and just listen to what someone else has to say is, again, a loving act. And so that just brings us closer. And one of the best ways to practice that is start to do it with yourself. When we kept saying, how do we, asking ourselves questions, getting to know, are the thoughts that I'm having, are they actually mine? Or are they the thoughts that everyone else I'm projecting that everyone else is having of me? Or is it because this organization or, the way I grew up or the culture or the societal influence, all the things we've been talking about in this podcast before, all these outside things, do I even agree with them? And it could be yes, and that's fine. But if we don't take the time to actually ask and seek to understand and listen to ourselves, then we are going to feel really disconnected. We're not going to be fully aligned with our true selves, because we'll just be embodying all these thoughts that aren't actually ours.
Yes. What a beautiful place to wrap up.
Yay. Thank you all.
And thank you all so much for joining us for this episode of a Heart Leader podcast, where our heart and our mind align. If you have enjoyed what we're doing and would like to make certain that you do not miss an episode as we take this epic journey together, take a moment now and hit like and subscribe wherever you are listening to us. It helps us more than we can possibly tell you. It informs us, and it just provides us with the context for what to continue to provide for you. Likewise, if you are interested in pre-registering for the book, Silence Your Inner Critic, you can head on over to the website silenceyourinnercritic.com, and you'll get 20% off when we launch this amazing book. You'll also get a free workshop with it. It's one of our best-selling workshops, and you get it absolutely free. It is the mirror technique, and it will walk you through a daily activity for a week for how to clear off that fog and that distortion that the inner critic can provide, and allow you to see yourself with those loving eyes again. Until next time, I'm your host, Amber, and I'm here with Austin, and we look forward to reading your comments and feedback below and seeing you next week.